I would say, and this is where I wouldn't have the wording, so I'd, like maybe we can even put some wording to this, but that right use of power framework, I think ethical leadership, right? So I see that component coming in. And then obviously our consulting approach, which we describe with the 5 Ds, but which you and I probably would say this is about, this is why our name is the Ally Co., is doing work with our clients, really asking those questions together, and then starting to put those dots together after having these really deep listening, meaningful dialogue, helping them then to, as leaders and as a team, move towards purposeful direction together. So I think we can talk about what the features or the offering differences, but just at the core of it, I would say it's really a conscious way of approaching the change we're trying to make with our clients and leaning on whatever modality, whatever framework is needed in that moment.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that is something that our clients describe as different, is around, we're not locked into a rigid model. Like, we don't bring a framework or a model and trying to fit all of the problems and issues into that framework, which is, let's face it, I'd say it's a temptation for a lot of coaches and consultants to say, hey, this model I've been trained on, or this model I developed myself, and I'm just going to stick to it. And everything it's kind of that hammer looking for nails, as opposed to what's the job to be done here. So I think that very conscious use of power and intentional coming alongside and working with clients is a differentiator for sure. Why don't you describe some work? Like, what does this actually look like in practice? Any stories from recent engagements with clients where we've brought more of a trusted advising approach to that engagement, and kind of what that looks like in practice, to go from that kind of the theory of it, doing with or coming alongside with different modalities. What does that look like in practice potentially?
Yeah, we were talking about this recently and thinking of this spectrum of different leaders or leadership teams that come to us. What we've noticed more of are leaders who are human-centered, who are impact conscious, and who are also thinking about systems that we're a part of. I think usually what they come to us back with is, hey, we've created space for all these conversations to happen, and we've gathered all this perspective and this feedback, and it's everywhere. Like, we don't know what we should be doing. And so they're almost stuck with, what do we do next? Because they've either gone and responded to something and then had this reaction that was not what they expected, or they just don't have like a sense of, is this the right thing we should be doing? So I think we have those leaders that are really asking us to come in and help them make sense of the deep listening and meaningful dialogue. And usually there's, what if we ask these questions these ways? Could we get to the thing? And that's, I think, where we help. But then we also help them to, all that divergent work they've done, how do we converge that now into purposeful direction? How do we help these leaders step into their power, to acknowledge their power, because a misuse of power is not using it, right? And to put together what they're hearing as is, give us clear vision, give us a clear strategy and direction. How can I know that I'm contributing, that I'm situated in my role and I know the role that I play in this, and that I feel safe to challenge, right? But I also know the boundary of, like, that's the direction. I can disagree, but I need to get behind it if I'm going to be here, right? That's one.
And I'm going to ask you to even go a layer down, is like, what does that look like? What kind of investment of time and energy do leaders have to put into some of these problems? What kind of activities might we embark on? Just to paint a bit of a picture of, because I think we probably lots of leaders out there would nod their heads and say, yes, I want to do that, but how? Like, what are some of the nuts and bolts?
A good entry point, or at least one that we've been asked to contribute to, has been an offsite. I think, obviously with the new ways of working, hybrid, we're seeing more hybrid remote teams. And so they're looking for opportunities to reconnect, usually in person, whether it's a leadership team or a co-CEOs. And they're using that opportunity to bring us there to help them facilitate, how could we use this time together to get to either where we don't know we should be getting to or where we think we should be getting to. And so if if you haven't done an offsite or you haven't really created that space for you and your leaders to just be together in a room and not just get work done, but connect, deepen trust, connection, and then alignment and agreement, then that's a great place to start, because that's where we will identify the most meaningful opportunities for not just you as a leadership team, but your organization or team to align its intention and impact. Mm-hmm. Right? So from those offsites, which have ranged from 2 days to, we did a full week the other day the other month for a team of 12, was it 12?
10 or 12, 10, 12 with us.
12 with us.
Yep.
And fully embedded ourselves in there, helped to actually use some of our tools and our models to think through what would be the most meaningful use of this time together. We also went and engaged each participant to identify the unique needs, values, goals, hopes, fear. And we were able to show them how you can pull this together to design a meaningful experience that then allowed us to have really great conversations and identify the most meaningful work for this team. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen from that is, which this is a pat on our back of our shoulder, is that we're now seeing that they're wanting to scale that leaderfulness, that behavior, those conversations, those skills and awareness to the next level of leadership. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's a great place to start. If you don't have an offsite, start thinking about one. If you have one coming up, it's a great way to bring in people to help you get really focused on what you want to get out of it. And then from there, a lot of our work has been about, really helping organizations to clarify their vision. And this is an opinion. These 10, 15-year visions are harder because of how fast things move these days. And so we've seen organizations having, getting more results with a 5-year picture, right? A little more clarity on what are the things we're seeing in 5 years around here so that people can get behind that. Mm-hmm. Or choose not to and say, oh, you know what? I needed to hear that because now I can go and do something else. Mm-hmm. But then also like bringing that back to how can we create traction through accountability, really meaningful feedback loops so that we are all moving together in the direction of that impact that we want to create. So we call it, I think we've been inspired by the entrepreneurial operating system, and we've kind of created our own framework for doing that. But it's really about what are our priorities and what needs to be true in terms of the roles, in terms of the tasks, the learning we need to do for us to be able to achieve those bigger goals that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that one thing that differentiates this type of work, this more trusted advising approach, which brings different modalities to the table, is to get to the system level and the structures that support the work. I think a lot of leaders and a lot of times we're thinking about, what's this current pain point, and can you come in and help me solve this current pain point? And it's like, yes, there's probably some things we can do to alleviate that current pain, but what's underneath of that? Do we have the right structures? And like you mentioned, roles, is the role clarity clear enough that people can actually be accountable to their impact and those types of things? And so a lot of the work ends up being us getting leaders and teams to get really, really clear, like you said, about whether it's a 5-year picture or whether it's the role description for this particular role on the team. If those things aren't clear, that ambiguity often creates a lot of tension and friction in the systems. And so interestingly, a few of our recent trusted advising engagements have been at that kind of structural place as a place to start, and that vision and values and those types of things as well. And then I think there's a piece of trusted advising, at least that I've been experiencing with leaders and clients lately, is being of that thought partner, but that gentle force of like pushing back sometimes on the solutions that they might have come up with, because we might be jumping to solutioning. And so actually just yesterday I sat down with a leader and reminded them of like, hey, what's the point of this thing? And are these activities sequenced in a way that makes sense? And we just spent an hour and we just redesigned a 2-day offsite that they're doing next week with their team, to kind of bring them together for connection and direction. But it's a thought partner. It's someone to help hold them to some sort of frameworks and processes, not in a rigid way, not like you have to do it this way, but have you thought of using it this way or this tool? And that creates a lot of value for leaders, because most of the leaders, and we've both been there in leadership roles, where it's pretty overwhelming because you're spinning all kinds of plates and you're wearing all the different hats, and it's easy to let the urgent things get in front of the really important things or the really meaningful things. And I think that oftentimes we're helping them refocus or at least create some space for that. What's the most meaningful thing here that we could be working on, not just what's most urgent or pressing?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of those things too, because sometimes there is that just the chaos. There's a moment of chaos and I need a sounding board or advice. And I think what our clients appreciate is the ability to pick up the phone and say, hey, there's this thing coming down, can you help me build it? Can you take a look at it? Give me your thoughts. What am I missing? Leadership can be lonely, right? You're at a position of power where some of these conversations aren't just it's just not fair to have with other people that don't have that insight, right? And could actually create another impact of its own. So I think just even having us there to think through things, but more proactively helping to cultivate deeper levels of awareness and skill for their fellow leaders so that everybody's growing together and taking on or building that adaptive capacity that we've been talking about. I think that's important. The other thing too, just, we call it our trusted advisor framework, if you will. What we're starting to see now is just more of this like a program, because it's not an individual. Sure, you'll have a lead, someone who is tying together your experience. But through that, for example, I'm a lead with a couple of clients. As different needs come up and it maybe requires a certain skill set, experience, then we have the ability to pull in our colleagues to service that part of the journey. And for me, that's really powerful because you're not just dependent on one person. We're actually bringing them a community with different practices of practitioners. And I think the other thing that people really love is, if, for example, our working agreements with an individual leader, our services are portable to their team. So at some point, let's say that there is something they want to focus on with their fellow leaders, they can just bring us in and say, hey, can you work with these leaders because as part of the program? So I think that portableness as well, not requiring a different agreement is something that I've seen people really appreciate because they can allocate those resources and energy where they need them.
Yeah. No, I just the other day had a conversation with a leader who wasn't the original kind of trusted agreement with, but it's a trusted advisor, set up with, but they're a member of the team and they were having some challenges around giving and receiving meaningful feedback. And so we're going to do some work on that. And it is the ability of a leader to point those resources and support into the system to really kind of meet the system where the needs are. And I think that's probably a differentiator from more traditional executive coaching. If people look at trusted advising and they think that that's probably executive coaching, kind of a differentiator is the portability of it to other team members and also the flexibility of it. And so it's not one of those things where, leaders only have 2 sessions a month for an hour. It's in the calendar. It's like you said, it's pick up the phone or send the email and say, hey, I need help with the thing. And we've got the resources and the team to kind of support that. So I think those are important things.
Well, also it's made us rethink our business model. I think originally we saw an opportunity to create some powerful tools, platforms, mechanisms to really drive deep listening, meaningful dialogue. For example, we said, okay, well, we could be asking better questions. We could be creating a better experience that produces data that will inform decision making in a more meaningful way. So we created our surveys. Right. And our surveys are just, they're part of our discovery steps or activities. Those are things that just get included. If there's a need to do a pulse survey or to validate something with a survey, we can do that from, we've designed some pretty ready to go ones to bespoke. Right. We've got also other things that we've created are some foundational learning and development. So awareness and skill builds for leaders. Those are things that we can set up and get in right away. And so it's funny how it's evolved. Like originally, all those were different offerings. But as we've evolved as an organization and started to go deeper into this work with, leaders and their teams, we've realized that these are just things that we can start to add. These are just, benefits of working with us.
They're pieces of the puzzle. And I think that the recognition that systems are more complex than just throw some learning and development at it, or throw some coaching at it, or throw some kind of traditional consulting at it. Is we have to be agile and we have to be adaptive to the needs of the client. And the trusted advisor part is getting close enough to the actual work that is being done and the needs that exist in the system to be able to say, oh, this is actually a learning and development thing, and we can do some skill building with a team. Or this is actually just direction setting, and you leaders have done enough listening. You need to come around the table, maybe at an offsite, but maybe you just need to get around the same thing and make a decision, and then communicate that decision in a meaningful way. So I think that that kind of flexible approach is more beneficial for the system. And I think that that's probably a way for a leader to think about when they're thinking about trusted advising versus it's for the system, it's for the team versus, and we might work individually with different parts of that system and we might work with them all together, but it's really what are the needs at the team and organizational level, and are we centering those? Because I think sometimes we get, I don't know, I've been guilty as a leader, I'm sure, of centering my needs. I need help, and so I'll put my hand up and I'll get some coaching for me. And we've heard this from clients who have spent quite a bit of resources on coaching and not seen the organizational impact or the team impact of that. It happens at the one-by-one individual level, which is fine, investment to make. And lots of our friends are coaches, and there's a place for traditional coaching in the world. But when it comes to actual impact on teams and organizations, I think that one at a time, one-by-one approach falls short, or it's a suboptimal way to do it.
Yeah, and I'd say the word that I've heard used to talk about something they're needing in addition to the coaching is an accountability partner that is going to understand this work, who has the operational experience of leading teams, in this system or in systems that we can, borrow from. I think that's the missing piece, is like, how do we actually operationalize this work? Right? Because there's a lot of great work, and I'm pretty sure most coaches don't want to get into that anyways, right? And so I think that's where it blends nicely, and something that we offer as well. I would say the other thing with the trusted advice, I think we've talked about this. Some of our clients would compare it to fractional executive support. And if I was to, focus in on certain areas, it would definitely be around operations, business growth, revenue, right? So really, and for that, it's really about like storytelling and finding those folks or those clients where you're going to do your best work and where you're both aligned on the desired impact you want to have. I think really helping them find that. And then the other piece would just be around like developing an intentional and conscious culture, right? The right use of power, leaderful teams. Those are probably the big ones. Are there any other ones you would say fractional? Learning and development?
Learning and development, which I think probably falls under, in a lot of places, people and culture or HR traditionally would kind of handle learning, but bigger organizations might have a learning department and that. And I think that kind of fractional learning officer support. I mean, that's really what I was doing the other day with a client in helping to help co-design their offsite, right? We've got a small piece of it, but they've got another couple of days and it's coming alongside to help infuse that process with some kind of human-centered design kind of methodologies and tools. I think was really, really helpful. I think those are the main spaces, but I do agree the shift for us in our approach has been from seeing those as kind of standalone things of, surveys and evaluation or culture assessments, I think we used to call them, to learning and development, to, the trusted advising. I think it's all kind of blending into a trusted advisor approach, which is, I think it's more impactful. I think that's what we're seeing, actually, maybe that's a question I have, is what kind of impact are you seeing with clients through this approach once we've kind of shifted into this model or more formally kind of embraced this way of working? What have you seen or heard from clients about the approach and how it's impacting? Yeah,
I think for some it's been it's challenging, obviously. This work really has us make prioritizing decisions, which can sometimes be tough, right? But I've also then seen a relief, like a weight off the shoulders, to actually, as a leader, say, we've done the work to really listen, to engage the right people in these meaningful conversations, And as your leaders, this is the direction. Because a lot of the time we hear, we don't have a clear vision, we don't have clear strategy. Like we hear that all the time.
My role's not clear.
Yeah.
Who's doing what?
And you might still hear that if someone just doesn't agree with what you're saying. And so the work that we do really helps them get clear, because not enough organizations and leaders say, here's what we're going to be prioritizing over the next, quarter, year. What they some get there, but a lot of them don't say, this is what we are not doing. And I think we're helping them do this in a clear, conscious, we would say conscious communication is how they operationalize their power. We really help them do that. Mm-hmm. And then to create, like you said, structure, roles, supports, systems, processes that will enable everybody to contribute to this mission, right? So that people feel like I know my role in this journey, and I know the contribution I'm trying to make. So now I can even be very specific about the type of feedback that I need, the type of learning that I need, right? So I think that's what we've started to see is people are starting to row the boat in the same direction. And yes, we do see some people leaving the team, but I'm pretty optimistic based on what I've seen that this has been a great thing for everybody involved. Because sometimes people feel locked into something because they love the camaraderie, they love the commute maybe and the pay or whatever. There's pieces that they love, but there's something down that is just not fulfilling them. Mm-hmm. And by unlocking them and unlocking that and showing, like helping them get to that next place of success, that actually is quite a powerful thing too. We've seen happen, right? Mm-hmm. We've had that happen with ourselves as we grow and realize we need different roles in our organizations, right?
Yep.
So I'd say those are big things. I would say confidence. That's a big thing I've noticed in leaders. Just owning their voice, aligning their messaging. We have a lot of co-CEOs, or I would say large leadership teams, really starting to use similar language. How about you?
Yeah, I think all of those things. I think the unstuckness part of it, like getting unstuck, I think is probably the primary outcome, at least initially in a trusted advisor engagement, is we've been wrestling with this thing. You know, that week-long offsite we did, I think that the leader of that team commented at some point, he's like, we did a year's worth of work in 3 days or something to that effect, which means they'd been wrestling with these decisions and trying to get aligned and trying to do the things for a full year. And in 3 days of really focused, facilitated, concentrated effort, was able to move that forward. There's no silver bullet. There's no one thing, but getting unstuck is that first piece. And I think that's probably the most common phenomenon that leaders describe. It. Maybe it's that sense of relief that goes with like, oh, at least there's movement. At least we're moving in the direction kind of, we're not there yet, but we know where we're headed to.
The real issue is out.
Yep. It's not stuck in the team somewhere, whether that's a personal issue or a systems issue or a vision misalignment or ambiguity. Usually it's some level of ambiguity in the system. And so clarity and unstuckness, I think, are the two things that leaders describe, a few weeks or into the engagement or after some initial kind of trusted advising work, for sure.
Yeah. Other than that, I think when I think of the clients and teams that we're working with, where you just, that state of flow where it just feels like you're having an impact, a lot of that work is quite, it's agile, but it's about, I guess, calling out patterns of behavior that no longer serve us and starting to redesign our ways of working with patterns, either reinforcing patterns of behaviors that work really well here that should work here. We hear a lot about role clarity. Like for me, it's the work that we do here. One of the impacts is people are confident about, like I said earlier, their role on this team and the contribution they're making. Like what a feeling, what a bunch of feelings around that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And then just even that, being situated in that, and then thinking about your life outside of work, we see that harmonization, I think, in people's storytelling about what this has meant for them, not just with their workplace relationships, but just generally in life. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that patterns of behavior piece is probably a separate podcast. We could actually dig into how to do that on a team, because thinking back to that offsite, I think that might have been the year's worth of work that had been leading up to. It was like, this is actually identifying, naming the pattern that they were stuck in, and then identifying what's the alternate, like what's the preferred pattern, and who do we need to be as leaders, and what needs to be true in order for us to live in this space, and for everyone on the team to step into their power to make that happen. Right? Yeah. Sometimes I think that, and again, that's our approach of being the team is the client, right? This leadership team is the client. And so even though we might have been hired by you know, you're complicit and you're part of the system. And so you're going to get the feedback and you're going to get the support along with everyone else to get unstuck from whatever that pattern is. But I think that's probably something we could dig into on a separate episode of how to unlock some of those patterns, those stuckness things on teams. What else should people know about trusted advising? We've talked a bit about individualized work and personalized leadership development in 360s. I think we recorded a podcast on that previously, but that's important to know that kind of intention impact assessment and kind of working with you and your team to close that gap is a big piece of the work that we do. But we've got some content already recorded on 360s, which might have evolved or probably evolved since we last sat down.
Yeah. I think one of the things we've been conscious about, and I'm just thinking back to the podcast recording we just had with Learning for Action, was, I think we've been trying to find ways of identifying the most meaningful opportunities, but not in a way that judges. I think we've really been trying to be conscious of being compassionate and gracious with folks, from leaders, people with a lot of power, to those that are maybe marginalized or in positions of down power. I think what we've truly tried to do is create those spaces to have all of those different voices heard. And I think we do a great job of helping people to truly be heard, right? And to understand different perspectives, which doesn't necessarily mean agree with them, right? Because I think what we see a lot of is, disagreement, but will that disagreement prevent you from servicing or impacting the people you're ultimately here for? And I think our work really helps to clarify that. We think healthy disagreement, healthy tension, healthy conflict drives amazing innovation, great conversations, but not at the expense of helping those that we're here to help. And I think we really help them establish boundaries. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think that we have a bit of a conflict map that we sometimes use to kind of evaluate where a team might be. And a team I'm working with right now is in that unhealthy conflict territory because it's visible and everyone can see it, but it's keeping things stuck. It's causing silos between leaders and their teams. And so there's kind of that unhealthy conflict, which is visible. Everybody can kind of see it, but it's not moving. And then probably more often a pattern that we see is this artificial harmony, where you get around the table and everyone's nodding their head and smiling, but then after the meeting, all the little sub-meetings break out and everybody's having those conversations. We bring that conflict into the middle. So the first thing is making it visible. And then, like you said, using it as an opportunity to be innovative and to disagree, and that's fine, but to create some context around, but we still have to get work done, and we still have to move the needle forward on whatever the mission is, right? And so, again, maybe it's that stuckness piece, and sometimes we're stuck and only a few people are feeling that stuckness, and sometimes the whole team is feeling that in the way of kind of visible conflict. But it really comes down to that. We can disagree. We can challenge each other, right? We can have different opinions, but at the end of the day, we have to move the thing forward, whatever the thing is. And I think a lot of leadership teams and teams in general struggle with that, right? We see a lot of interdepartmental lack of collaboration because of the inability to have that kind of conflict or those kinds of discussions. And so that is a lot of the work we do around meaningful dialogue, I would say, is bringing some tools to the table to say, you can have these conversations and we can have them in certain ways and with certain tools that are going to make it less likely for us to get everyone defensive in the room, right? And then having our defenses take over and getting in the way of meaningful conversation. So yeah, I think that's a big piece of it, I think, is that deep listening into meaningful dialogue, into purposeful direction. I think what happens is we end up working with teams who either are stuck in the deep listening and don't know what to do next, or keep giving direction and nothing is really working very well, and they need to actually slide the needle the other way and maybe get some dialogue and deep listening going. So I think we're kind of playing with teams to get them from a stuck point to where they need to go next.
Yeah, and one of the things that it's visible, like I can see it, and we talked about it earlier, was on some of the work that I feel we're really utilizing, as a lot of our strengths and what we have to offer. We're actually on the on the corporate structure or on the team structure as either a board of advisors, part of their board of advisors, or very specifically in a role that we're supporting. And I think that speaks to why we named our company what we named it, right? Which is like, we didn't want this performative partnership. We actually want to be activating the work that we are creating with our clients and to see ourselves as part of their strategy. I think for me anyways, that's telling, right? As opposed to us being a project. We're going to do a culture initiative this year. I think the people that get the work that we do say, we have these goals, we have these priorities. How might we become a team that is, optimizes what we have here, that breaks down the things that no longer serve us, whether they're behaviors, processes, or systems, and redesign something that's going to help us achieve this. And I think the beautiful thing about that is we don't need to be a project budget. You have projects that you're going to do anyways. We can just join those and help you to, think about maybe how you might approach that differently.
And it's that with, not to.
Yes.
Coming alongside and working on the things that are most important, as opposed to that kind of, we got to do a separate culture initiative, or we got to do a learning and development series for our leaders or whatever. It's like, no, you don't actually. And you probably should stop. Like, I'm going to go out and say that a lot of learning and development, a lot of mainstream traditional consulting coming in project by project, checkbox work that doesn't move the needle in a meaningful way. And you alluded to it, or you mentioned it, but like, it's operating system level. It's getting down to say, hey, we have to build the rhythms and the behaviors and the capacities and the skills at these levels so that you don't actually need continuous, support for all of these projects. Like, we can build those muscles on the team. And I think that's a lot of the joy that I get out of the work, is actually when clients start coming to the table, and they're coming to a table further along than they would have previously because of the work we had done, and we had built some of those muscles and capacity to be like, hey, yeah, I've actually thought about that, and I've built that into this round of whatever it is. So yeah, there's lots there to explore for sure.
I'd say the other approach that we take that I think, I know is important for us because of the success we know we can have, is there has to be a level of foundational alignment and agreement at the highest level of leadership or power. And so that's usually where you and I, like, where our company starts. Because otherwise we get these requests, hey, help us step up the leadership impact of our middle management now, who is in charge, who have got promoted based on doing a specific technical job really well. So now they're a leader. Well, it's like, it's not that easy. There's actually now a gap between where you want them to be and then between where they will be and you will be. So I think us starting there really helps to create that leaderfulness at all levels so that the team can grow, can develop capacity throughout the organization or the system. I think that's like one of our biggest clients, if you will, one that we started off at the executive and senior leadership level, and we're continuing with that stream, but now we're pushing into their operations and culture team. And then that next level of leadership, so that they can really develop this leaderful team of 200 people. So for me, that leaderfulness of the system and that work we're doing, we're seeing the impact of that in the stories that are being told, in the milestone markers that they're achieving for revenue, for testing results with their consumers. Like, there's data. Do you want to talk about how they can buy it?
We probably should, just for our own, like, making alignment and talking through. So I can imagine that some leaders are listening to this, and they know how to buy learning and development. They know how to buy a workshop. They know how to buy executive coaching. How does someone go around buying a trusted advising program?
Yeah, I think there'll be some level of variation in the approach, So obviously, just like anybody probably says, hey, let's talk about it. We'd love to hear where you're at. But here's what we've seen. We've seen an individual leader come up to us, usually operations or, that GM, executive director level, come to us and say, I need help to bring this team together, my leaders, to really align them, to get really clear on how we're going to work together. So usually it's help my team, right? And we've got, I would say, two archetypes in that space. We have one that was called the courageous activist, they're going to be in that every single part of that work. In fact, we're probably going to be talking with them daily sometimes, right? They really involve themselves. And then slowly what we've seen is we still work with them, but now they start to ask our team to start to work with their leaders. They're really scaling that experience. The other leader we see knows they're called the supporting sponsor. They usually have this very unique expertise that drives a tremendous amount of value, probably around revenue for the organization. And they know that that's where they are best. And so they need to be connected to the work that we're doing, but they really connect us with their team of leaders. And so they're not in the day-to-day. We're usually keeping them in the loop so that they can support the work we're doing with the larger system, right? So I would say those are the two different types of leaders that we typically work with. So if you're a leader that's listening to this, and we might be someone to meet with your team and yourself. It might be a leader who actually is just saying, like, I've been put into this position and I don't have maybe expertise in this area, or I don't have knowledge in this area. I don't need to hire someone full time for that because I don't know what I don't know. So even just bringing in someone to help me identify where those opportunities may be as we grow, I would say we see that. Rhythms wise, I think it varies, but the offsites, like, that was a long one. We don't usually do a week, but it was a big team. I would say they're like 2 days minimum, right? I would say other than that, we're meeting with leaders, the individual leaders, maybe once, twice a month. We do have, for larger programs of work, our clients love this, the stand-ups, where let's say we're working with multiple teams. Well, we all meet weekly for 15 to 30 minutes to make sure that this work is staying aligned, right? Because we don't want everybody off doing different things.
How often does a project get assigned to someone at the beginning of the year, and then 6 months later, nothing's happened and it hasn't moved, right? And it gets stuck somewhere in the system. And I think that because we get access in different ways to different parts of the system, we can keep that view of that and keep it moving. Moving along.
It's funny. The stand-ups are one of the most popular rhythms.
Yep.
And they're fast, right? They're 15, 30 minutes. But there's also something human about just seeing that person every week that you wouldn't otherwise. And I think it allows us then to get into the tension and have those conversations probably a little quicker than you would otherwise, right? So I think the efficiency in how we work, the safety, if you will call it, is higher. And so we're just using our time better. We're performing better, right?
Do we want to, we don't really need to touch on like length and duration, or...
Let's just say it, and then we'll see if we want to use it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so everything from a 2-day offsite and probably some associated work around that. We never just do the offsite. There's usually there's always prep work and then some follow-up pieces. And so that might be, a few weeks or a month's worth of work to kind of contain all the way up to, I think our longest trusted advising program right now is about a year, kind of 12-month program with some leaders. But it is a bit of a choose your own adventure within that, I would say, based on the needs of the team and what it is we're tackling and at what levels of the system and how long some of those things just naturally take in these systems. Any thoughts on kind of the co-created aspect of trusted advising and how we might approach building something meaningful with a team or with a leader? Yeah,
I think so. Some of our clients are just used to engaging consultants and coaches, and so they typically have a budget. I think our monthly budgets, if this is helpful for folks, is usually if there's an individual that's part of a larger team, they're investing about $3,000 to $6,000 a month per individual, but that also includes like bringing them together as a team. The larger programs of work, themselves, for a year, typically, let's call it a team of 10 to 12. We're seeing, if we're playing more of the, I wouldn't say we're as hands-on. We see budgets being around $10,000 a month. Again, that includes all of our team contributing and however best we want to do that mix. The offsites themselves, they're usually a larger investment in that moment because of the work that goes into planning it, facilitating it, and then pulling the learnings and activating those. I would say those are, larger investments. If people are looking to do some budgeting, 2 senior consultants for a full day with all the planning activities, the facilitation, and the after is $10,000, right? If you're looking to budget, and then, depends on the amount of days, but it's around that. Obviously, as consultants, we always ask, do we need 2 of us there for this work? And we also have other combinations that we offer, I think, based on the needs. But yeah, 10 to 12 executives, we do. It's like herding cats. So
you definitely need 2 sets of eyes and in those rooms. Yeah. Awesome.
Do you think we add the numbers and stuff? I'm not sure about it.
I think so.
Yeah, it seems.
It's that fine line between like pitching, like selling our services, and just describing the work and how it differentiates. I think I lean more towards let's describe it and differentiate, and people will.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Yeah.